Welcome back to another exciting episode of bringing Jesus back into focus. Why was he out of focus? 1700 years ago, in the age of Constantine, the Emperor Constantine of Rome, the 4th century AD, the Christian leaders who were all pacifists up until 312 AD, beyond there, around that time, they ended up being influenced by Constantine, and they converted all the Christians who were worshipping the one spiritual divine loving life force of heaven and the loving spiritual being that it all comes forth from, which is only love. The entire consciousness of this being is nothing but love. Heaven is nothing but love. To get to heaven you have to be nothing but love, as Jesus was. What they did was they converted the Christians back into worshipping the Jewish God Yahweh. The Yahweh is a two-headed God. The Jewish religion is not monotheistic. It is a dualistic religion. That's very clear and very intelligently logical and correct. You can read it in their scriptures. There are two gods, opposing forces. Romans had the god of Mars, a war god, and god of Pax, peace and love one another. The Jews had Yahweh, a god of war, murder, slaughter, exactly the same as the Roman god, the Greek god, the Egyptian god, Sekhmet, a brutal, violent, murdering war god. They called that war god Yahweh. The Romans went to the god at the temple of Mars to be blessed by the priest. They'd sacrifice an animal and go off and kill and murder and steal the land, the Roman Empire. The Jews went to the Yahweh temple. The priest blessed them. They slaughtered an animal to offer it to Yahweh, the war god, and off they went to Jericho to slaughter and kill and steal the land. Mars, Sekhmet, Ares, Yahweh One, that's all you can call it. There's no other word for it. Yahweh One is a war god. They're all war gods. All war gods are satanic, which is why Jesus said, you're worshipping Satan. He said that to the Jews. Stop doing it. Stop killing and murdering. He said he was a murderer from the start, and you do the lusts and desires of Satan. Now, the trouble is, the Romans had a separate temple for their god of peace. So did the Greeks. They had Irene, and the Egyptians. Other cultures were honest. They knew these two divinities are completely opposing forces, black and white. Good, love, evil, murder. So they called that other god, the peace-loving god, Pax or Irene, a different name, a different temple, a different energy. The Jews, unfortunately, were quite deceptive, quite deceiving and cunning. They called the god of love your neighbour as yourself, Yahweh, the exact same god as their war god, and put them in one temple. That is a schizophrenic cracker. It's dishonest. They have to separate those two gods out, and you need some new Jewish rabbis to do that. The trouble is, as a Christian, I was born into the Jewish Christian Catholic Church. I left when I was 16 because they were teaching this lie that the Jewish God's the same divine loving life force that Jesus was at one with. That's a lie, that's slander. Then they said the book of Revelation, that's Jesus coming on the clouds. That's the book of Daniel from the Jewish religion. What's that even doing near Jesus? That is a filthy, stinking slander. Get it out of there. Oh no, we've got to teach that. No, you don't. What's wrong with you? So I left. So I had to start writing about it. I didn't bother about it, for the last 50 years or so, until I got a fungal infection and I'm nearly dying. My body, that is, not my spiritual body. So I thought, well, I'm going to look into this. What are these churches have been teaching lately about Jesus? I haven't been to any other church except the Catholic Church when I was young. And I thought, oh, hopefully someone's teaching Jesus' teachings in a far better way. To my shock and horror, some of these denominations I visited were synagogues. All they talked about was the Jewish religion and the book of Revelation. They just leapfrogged over Jesus. The only thing Jesus did was he died on the cross and his blood cleansed them of the sin, and the rest is all about Jesus who's coming to kill all the bad people and start wars and cause sicknesses and fires and starve people to death. He's coming. That'll be great because we'll be saved and he's going to get rid of all the bad people. So Jesus is going to come back and do everything opposite to what he did while he was here, where he fed the starving, healed the sick, tried to say love your enemies. Suddenly they're teaching, he's going to come back and do the exact opposite. That is just rubbish and stinking slander. They made me really angry. I couldn't believe they were teaching this rubbish. So these are the two books that I had to do. The Gospel of Jesus Unplugged is a new translation. I've been out in the world there for about a year now. You can buy it online or send me an email to jcnfocus@gmail.com and I'll post you out one for the cost of it all, sort of thing, and the postage. And it's a better reading of the Gospels. I use the Greek interlinear and various Gospels. And the fact that I've known Jesus my whole life as love and non-violence, that's why I left the Jewish Christian Catholic Church, because they were teaching something else. So it's easy for me to talk about Jesus as love and non-violence and to get rid of all the Jewish overlays and the poisonous things in the Gospels, because they have been altered. And I talk about that in the next book, The Teachings of Jesus Unplugged, which I'm reading from tonight. I'm putting all the chapters on YouTube. And that's where I explain what's gone wrong and the true meaning of his teachings about we have two bodies, one dies and one lives and moves on. And that's the spiritual body and the body of flesh. Just feed it to the vultures, he said. Now that's the book there that's coming out in the first 2 weeks of January 2026. And the general reading is this on the back of the cover. It sort of sums up what the book's sort of generally about, more or less. The spiritual teachings of Jesus are a universal calling to all human children on earth to awaken into our spiritual body and true identity of love and non-violence before our dualistic body and mind of the flesh dies and returns to the earth. Only our spiritual body and soul live on. We must prevent the dualistic mind of our earthly body of flesh from controlling us and become at one with our spiritual mind, filled only with the loving life force of our loving spiritual creator. Then our two bodies, one made of the earth and one formed of spirit, can be in harmony and at one in purpose to bring the spiritual love and peace of heaven to earth for all children. Only true spiritual children of light and love can enter the heavenly spiritual world. All those children divided within themselves between love and hatred cannot enter. The words of Jesus can awaken and transform us. I say a prayer that I've made up some time back to center myself into my spiritual body. So if you're sitting there, you've got two bodies, whether you know it or not, you have. One's going to die and rot and stink and go back to the earth. Goodbye, compost. There's no life in it. You leave your body in your spiritual body. Jesus taught this. But you've got to reap what you sow. So you've got to be careful now. Lead a life of love, non-violence. This is the prayer. If you say this prayer every day in a quiet place, think you're in a spiritual body that's full of light and a loving spiritual life force. It's not your physical body. It's a different body. Think about it. Imagine it. A loving, beautiful spiritual body, like water in a vase. That's the simple analogy I use. Move into the water. Don't worry about this physical vase so much. Just think of your spiritual body that's in the vase of your physical flesh. And this is the prayer that will help you center. I use the word she for the loving spiritual creator because she gives birth to my spirit, so she's a female for me. But say he if you want to, if you're used to that. As I rest upon this earth, the Holy One, she will give birth to who I really am, awakening me from clay and sand, a spiritual child of the divine, with only her love that fills my mind. To every creature I will be kind in every single land. For this is truly who I am, a spiritual child of the loving spiritual creator in the heavenly spiritual world, born out of the earth to bring her love to children in need and help guide them home to heaven as she has guided me. Through the spiritual way and teachings that Jesus gave us to be just as he, a spiritual child of love on earth. That's who I am. I've got to understand that's who I am. Jesus gives us the words to describe our character, our disposition, the new covenant. The Greek word's badly translated. It shouldn't be covenant. It should be disposition or characteristics. The characteristics of your spiritual life and body are different to your flesh body. The flesh is dualistic. Pain, pleasure, hate, love, kill, save. It's all dualistic potentials. Your spiritual body only has one potential. The loving spiritual life force in it is only love, and it comes from the heavenly spiritual world, which is only love. So if you're in your spiritual body, if you really get into it like Jesus and Buddha did, you can't hurt anyone ever again. You can't sin again. You can't do wrongdoing or evil. You can't do it anymore. You've transitioned into awakening into the higher level of your identity, which is spiritual. But you're still in your flesh, like Jesus and Buddha. So then you can start loving other children, and you'll be different. You won't worship money, and you won't be involved in wars and all this sort of rubbish. All this satanic stuff. You won't be involved in that. You'll be different. The spirit earth logo at the bottom, the cross and dove, represents the two bodies in one circle. The body of Jesus, his flesh body, died on the cross and was buried and rotted away. But he flew away in his spiritual body. That's what the dove represents. He appeared to his disciples in his spiritual body, not his body of flesh, as I explained in the book. Jesus himself said that. He said the only thing to do with the dead body of flesh is feed it to the vultures. He said that. He taught that. He said your other body is taken to be near to your spiritual loving Creator. He said that. It's in the Gospels. Now, the kingdom of heaven is within you, chapter 22. The reason Jesus said the kingdom of the heavenly spiritual world is within you is because you have an eternal spiritual body and soul mind of love within your temporary body of flesh, which you need to become at one with and live out of, as only this spiritual body can take you to heaven. The flesh isn't going there. Buddha would say your mind or consciousness travels on after the death of your body of flesh. And both of these spiritual teachers taught our spirit or mind must be clean to enter a high spiritual state of existence called heaven or nirvana, and we will all reap as we sow. Identical teachings. All bodies of flesh, including the earthly body of Jesus, eventually die and break down into the various material constituents they are made of and return to the earth from which they were formed. Our spiritual body and soul mind of love are formed from a spiritual source. Jesus calls this source an eternal spiritual creator and being of perfect love. And it is her loving spiritual life force that empowers and gives life to our spiritual bodies and souls, and they need nothing else to have life. And as the source of their creation is eternal and perfect love, so will our spiritual bodies and souls be eternal and perfect in love. He calls this knowing the truth that will set you free. Free from being only a temporary body of flesh that dies by awakening into your spiritual body and soul mind of love that is eternal. That's how you're set free. That's what he said. Hearing his spiritual teachings can be the catalyst that ignites us to seek for this truth within our physical lives. As Jesus says in Luke 12:49, I have come to ignite a fire on the earth, and how I wish it were already ablaze. And in the Thomas Gospel, whoever is close to me is close to the fire, and whoever is far from me is far from the heavenly spiritual world. The term fire here represents spiritual enlightenment or awakening. He spoke of this in different ways, often using common daily activities to help lead the children into understanding the deeper meaning of something that was very foreign to them. A simple metaphor or analogy using common symbols can often penetrate more easily into a child's mind and convey the meaning of theological explanations more clearly. Since most of the children Jesus taught were from a simple rural society and culture, his parables were often crafted in this way, especially for them. In Matthew 13:10, the disciples asked Jesus why he spoke in parables to the crowds. Jesus said, to you it has been granted to be told the deeper mysteries of the heavenly spiritual world, but it has not been granted to them. For whoever has some understanding, to him more shall be given, and he will have an abundance of understanding. But whoever does not have any understanding, then what he currently has must first be taken away from him. Jesus is very aware that to learn his new spiritual way of understanding, the old understanding they had must be replaced through a gradual transition of letting go of the old and adopting the new. That is not an easy task when old wrong beliefs are so heavily entrenched. While his disciples were privileged to be guided and slowly build up a deeper spiritual understanding through the teachings he personally gave them, the crowds had no basic understandings to build on. That is why he had to initially use symbolic parables to help them slowly transition into the deeper understandings of his spiritual teachings. It is often overlooked that he also had to use parables to avoid being stoned to death by the Jewish leaders for openly blaspheming their two-headed God, Yahweh. The kingdom of heaven is within you, Luke 17:20. The Pharisees asked Jesus when the kingdom of our loving Creator was coming. He said, the heavenly spiritual world of our loving spiritual Creator does not come through visual observation. Nor will they say, look, it is here, or look, it is over there. Realize this, the heavenly spiritual world of our loving Creator is within you. Jesus is referring to the spiritual connection with heaven we can all have within our body of flesh by becoming at one with our inner spiritual body and soul, mind of love now. That's how we get to heaven. The Thomas Gospel, his disciples said to him, "When will the kingdom of the loving Creator come?" Jesus said, "It will not come by looking outwards. They will not say, 'Behold, it is over there,' or 'it is over here.' But rather, the kingdom of the loving spiritual Creator is spread out upon the earth, but men do not see it." Jesus states we will not find the heavenly spiritual world by simply looking outwards at the material world. We must look inside ourselves. If we only see this world through the eyes of our body of flesh with its dualistic mind, it is a material vision only. But if we see this whole world through the eye of love, our inner spiritual body and soul, then heaven's presence has come to earth through us. And if enough of us woke up to being spiritual, then heaven would indeed be spread out across the earth. We would bring that heavenly love to all situations. We'd destroy the armaments industry. If we all loved enough, we would get rid of it en masse. We'd demonstrate for all governments in the world to shut down the armaments industry, stop wars, etc. Thomas Gospel, Jesus said, "If your leaders say to you, 'Look, the kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds of the air will get there before you. If they say, 'It is under the sea,' then the fish of the sea will get there before you. Rather, the kingdom of our loving spiritual Creator is inside of you and outside of you. When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will understand that you are spiritual children of our loving spiritual Creator. But if you do not know your true spiritual identity, you will live in poverty, and it is you who are that poverty." Again, Jesus draws us to look inside ourselves for the heavenly spiritual world connection, rather than search for it as an earthly kingdom we can see with our physical eyes. He says the heavenly spiritual kingdom is both inside and outside of us. If we are an awakened spiritual child of our loving Creator on earth as Jesus was, then the loving life force of heaven will empower our inner spiritual body and soul, and we will manifest heaven's love in the outside material world that is all around us. But this can only happen if we fully realize we are spiritual children first. This is what he means when he says we must get to know our true selves and become at one with our spiritual identities, and then we will be known by our loving Creator as her spiritual children on earth. But to remain in the flesh identity only, devoid of spirit, is to remain in poverty. The Thomas Gospel, Jesus said, "Whoever finds their true self is worth more than the material world. Whoever knows everything but lacks within, lacks everything." If you lack your spiritual body of love now, you've got nothing at the end of your physical journey, because your body turns to dust. You don't take your money with you, or your Mercedes Benz, or your Ferrari, or your mansion in the rich suburbs. You've got nothing to leave with. Your spiritual body could be just empty of the loving life force, tiny, little, maybe covered in filthy dirt, evil, greed, whatever it is, material stuff. Treasure hidden in a field. Matthew 13:44. I like this one. Jesus said, "The heavenly spiritual world of our loving Creator is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found, and in great joy at finding it, he sells all his earthly possessions and buys that field, making it his own." In the Thomas Gospel, the Jesus version is this: "The heavenly spiritual world of our loving Creator is like a man who had a treasure hidden in his field, but did not know it. And after his death, he left it to his son. His son inherited the field, but did not know it was there either, and so gave it away. Whoever bought it came and ploughed the field and found the treasure, and he began to share it with those he loved." The thing about the Thomas Gospel, they tried to destroy it, the early corrupt Christian leaders of the church around the 4th century, because a lot of the comments in the Gospels of Thomas show you how corrupt For example, Matthew's gospel has corrupted some of the sayings. Matthew's deliberately done that to turn Jesus into an apocalyptic, end of the world, murderer. But this one here, you can see the little detail here. He's like a man who had a treasure hidden in his field but did not know it. Your spiritual body, if you don't know it's in your body of flesh, you'll never find it. You won't look for it. That's a nice little detail. Our dualistic body of flesh is the field, and our eternal spiritual body and soul, mind of love is the treasure hidden within our earthly body that we must search for to find, like ploughing into the earth to reveal what is beneath it. We need to plough through and break up our old dualistic ways of thinking and judging others that cover the singularity of love that lies beneath them, waiting for us to be at one with. It is by living out of this spiritual love now on earth that we are preparing ourselves to enter the heavenly spiritual world of love. Once we discover it, we can let go of our material life of the flesh or possessions and center ourselves into our spiritual life, empowered by this loving life force with great joy at finding out who we really are. Eternal spiritual children of our loving spiritual creator in the heavenly spiritual world. That's who you really are underneath your physical ego identity, whatever it may be. But those who do not know about it or search for it cannot point it out to their children, who do not look for it either. See, that's why it's dying out in Australia and other countries. Spirituality is dying out because children are no longer searching it and finding it and passing it on. The material world, the cult of the rich and all that stuff, selfishness, it's secularism, it's all destroying the spiritual connections in children. It's terrible, shocking. This is why we must be a light to others in the darkness of this material world to help them find this spiritual awakening too. The one great pearl, Matthew 13. Jesus said, "The heavenly spiritual world of our loving Creator is like a merchant seeking good and beautiful pearls, and when he finally finds such a pearl, extremely valuable, he goes and sells all his earthly possessions to buy that pearl." The Thomas Gospel, Jesus said, "The heavenly spiritual world of our loving Creator is like a merchant who had a supply of merchandise and then found a pearl. Now the merchant was wise, and he sold all his merchandise and bought the single pearl for himself. So also with you, seek after the treasure that is unfailing, that is abiding, where no moth comes to consume and no worm destroys." The Thomas Gospel is a little bit more detailed. In the day of Jesus, pearls were rare and very valuable. Jesus again points out that we must go looking for the spiritual pearl within ourselves, and when we find it, place that above all of our earthly possessions and make that our primary identity. He also states in Thomas that our spiritual body and life is eternal, and we will live out of it in the heavenly spiritual world beyond all forms of corruption. And the one who seeks it and becomes at one with it is wise, because our spiritual life is eternal, but our material life and body of the flesh is only temporary. In the Thomas Gospel, Jesus said, "If you do not fast from the world, you will not find the spiritual kingdom." The one great fish. This is really interesting. The Thomas Gospel is the correct version that they tried to destroy. A person, you and me, a person is like a wise fisherman, says Jesus, who cast his net in the sea and drew it up full of little fish from below. Among them he found one good and great fish. The wise fisherman threw all the little fish back into the sea, and without any hesitation he chose to keep the greatest fish. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. That is the original correct version that they tried to destroy, because Matthew distorted it and perverted it for this apocalyptic rubbish that's been laid onto Jesus. It's quite interesting how it's been poisoned, perverted and distorted deliberately. Luckily we've got the original. That's how we know they've corrupted the teachings in the Gospels. This is the original and correct version spoken by Jesus, which aligns with all of these sayings and is about personal spiritual development and awakening. Again, the fisherman had to search among all the fish to find the one great and good one, and being wise, does not hesitate to keep the greatest fish of all. his eternal spiritual body and soul, and throws the other insignificant little ones back into the sea, which represent his temporary earthly identities, made up of his possessions and position in society, based on his body of flesh. You see what Jesus is saying? Oh, you might be a doctor or an accountant or a prime minister or a king or something or other. That's not your true identity. It's just a profession. It's a little identity. Your true identity is you're a spiritual child of a loving spiritual creator in the heavenly world, and we've all potentially got that identity, you see. It's beautiful. Matthew 13:45, the distortion of the original teaching. Now this is really interesting. That's why I had to write this book, because of the slander and the deliberate distortion of his teachings to pervert what he was really saying. This is the Matthew version that's been deliberately perverted. Jesus said, the heavenly spiritual world of our loving Creator is like a fishing net that was cast into the sea and gathered some of every kind. And when it was full, they drew it up to the shore and sat down and collected the good into vessels, but the bad they cast out. It's a different dialogue, different meaning. Matthew follows this with these words, and this is the words that are false, a lie, supposedly attributed to Jesus. These are supposedly what Jesus said, but he did not say this. It's a lie. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come forth and separate the wicked from amongst the righteous and will cast them into the furnace of fire. There will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. That has nothing to do with the original in the Thomas Gospel, because it's a lie. It's a filthy, stinking bit of slander put in by either Matthew or someone who overwrote Matthew, and that's a fact. This version is false. It is not about personal spiritual development and awakening, but about the Jewish two-headed God destroying evil children in an apocalypse. And it does not match the preceding two sayings of Jesus in Matthew about the kingdom of heaven either. This altered version in Matthew could by itself possibly represent reaping what we sow, but it has been linked to a distortion. Matthew has altered the original to turn it into an apocalyptic account and destroy the true meaning of the words of Jesus. This is a serious distortion that runs throughout the Gospels to distract and take followers away from understanding the words of Jesus and become personally transformed and awoken into our spiritual body and true identity by them, to become the same as he was, a spiritual child of our loving spiritual creator in the heavenly spiritual world. Instead, this represents the two-headed God of the Jews in Daniel, who destroys its children who do wrong and slanders Jesus and our loving creator by putting these words in his mouth. They are not in the Gospel of Thomas. In the original, the fish rejected were just little, and not cast out or destroyed for being little, but put back in the sea to still exist. Even when we awaken to our true spiritual identity, we still need material possessions and a profession. But we do not worship them anymore or base our identity on them. That's what Jesus is saying. Matthew paints some fish as now being evil children who are destroyed by the God of Jesus in an apocalypse. The old wine of Daniel mixed into the new wine and poisoning it. Jesus said in the lost sheep parable, it is the will of our loving Creator that not the littlest or least of these lost sheep should be destroyed. And the end of the age is the day on which we all die. That's the end of the age. That's the apocalypse for me. When my body dies, that's when I go for judgment then, reaping what I sow. Not an apocalyptic event for the whole world. Although the way mankind is destroying this earth world and treating each other, we may bring an apocalypse upon ourselves. But our loving Creator and Jesus can never hurt anyone and will not be involved in such a monstrous action, for they are perfect love. The divine spiritual law of reaping as we sow returns to us whatever we have created during our life. The original and correct fish parable in Thomas is to encourage us to all search for and find that perfect, loving, spiritual identity inside us, and not to worship trivial, material, temporary things or empty, egotistical identities. So you can understand how Matthew's perverted that deliberately to destroy the original meaning and weave it in to his own apocalyptic agenda, that Jesus was coming on the clouds in Daniel and he's going to cause all these terrible things. It's a really evil. Matthew's gospel is the most evil of the gospels in the sense of it has this apocalyptic slander running right through it. And I wouldn't be surprised if Matthew is the true writer of Revelation. They know John isn't the writer because the styles of writing are different. All theologian scholars agree on that. They know it was written by someone else. They don't know who. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was whoever wrote Matthew wrote it. So that fish parable is really a beautiful example of the way the Gospels have been poisoned and distorted and perverted. So that's why you've got to understand these things. And luckily we got the Thomas Gospel to point out these very serious damages that are being done to Jesus' teachings. Whoop, hang on a minute.
I saw the city in the rain.
Lovely song.
Affirmation sounds.
But for the sake of this YouTube, I'll leave the little birds chirping on. So the fish parable is really important. So, see, Matthew took the fishermen, the wise fishermen, and made it into they. They draw up the nets. And they separate the good from the bad. And then they turn out to be the angels. Jesus says the angels will do that. They're going to throw people into hell at the apocalypse. I'm going to tell them to throw those people into hell and save those. You see what Matthew's done? He's taken a personal message from Jesus to look for the one good thing in your life, your spiritual body of love, and move into it. And forget about your other identities of being a king or, whatever you are, whatever egotistical identity you may be holding on to, let go of it. That's tiny compared to your beautiful spiritual identity. That's what he's saying. It's just about a personal fisherman, one person, you and me, finding the one good thing, the one good pearl. You see, the treasure in the field, our field. Matthew distorted it, perverted it, and it's a false aspect. This is not the true original saying of Matthew's. It's wrong. I just thought I'd point that out. That's why I had to write the book, because I can see this clearly because I know Jesus. Love and non-violence. So I know the apocalypse is rubbish. That's the book of Daniel. That's a Jewish belief. It's not Jesus' belief. However, heaven is like a mustard seed. Matthew 13:31. The kingdom of the heavenly spiritual world is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his garden. It is the smallest of seeds on earth, but when it has fully grown, it becomes the greatest of all herbs and puts forth large branches, and the birds of the air can make their nests in its branches under its protection. Jesus tells us the spiritual seed of heaven is planted in our own garden, in the prepared soil of our physical identity and earthly life. And if we are ready or prepared to receive the small seed, which represents the spiritual words and way of love of Jesus, then it will grow into a large spiritual plant, the greatest of all plants, and birds of the air will build their homes in it and be protected by it. The birds of the air means children who have awoken to their true spiritual identity, as the Greek word air also means spirit. So children of the spirit, that's what he's saying, will have their home in heaven. That's just what he's absolutely saying. The Greek translations not always, but they often misinform you. And once the seed of their spiritual identity has fully grown or awakened, it becomes the greatest part of their life. And they become the spiritual children who will enter the heavenly spiritual world of love to build their nests or homes in and be forever protected from suffering. You'll enter heaven. Congratulations. Our physical earthly life is like the roots of a plant in the soil that provides nourishment and water for the trunk and stems to grow towards the light. The light provides the energy for the leaves that produces sweet sugars and further nourishment for growth. Finally, a flower bud appears and it opens to form a beautiful perfect shape, producing the heavenly perfume of spiritual love that fills the air. Likewise, from within the base of a body of earth, our life rises up to open into a heavenly spiritual body, guided by the light and love of our loving spiritual Creator, always shining upon us from heaven, just like the sun shines on plants on the earth. Heaven is like yeast and bread flour, Matthew 13:33. Jesus said, the spiritual kingdom of our loving Creator is like a woman who took the yeast and concealed it in 3 measures of flour until it had all risen. Important word, that. Jesus is again pointing out that our spiritual life is found inside us. Flour dough by itself remains flat and will not rise, just as our body of flesh remains flat when it dies, and only our spiritual body rises. The yeast placed in amongst the flatbread dough represents the spiritual teachings and words of Jesus that are mixed into our material life of the flesh. They are what cause us to rise into our spiritual body and soul mind of love and get ready to enter the heavenly spiritual world of love, just as yeast makes dough, bread dough, to rise. Yeast must have moisture and warmth to flourish, and then the yeast cells grow and produce pockets of air that fill the flat bread and make it rise up. Interestingly, the Greek word for air can also mean spirit. Once again, you've got these air bubbles causing this bread to rise. It's the air, the spirit. It's all in a lot of his sayings. Likewise, the teachings and words of Jesus will flourish in us if we have the warmth of love in our hearts and souls, and the living water from heaven bubbling up within us that Jesus gives us. So we need warmth and moisture also in that way. Then they will cause our spiritual body and soul mind of love to rise up and come alive, just as yeast causes flatbread to rise. But if the flour dough is cold, the yeast will not flourish and make the bread rise and be soft. Likewise, if we are cold-hearted with no warmth of love towards others, the words of love that Jesus gives us will not make our spirits rise up. We will remain hard and never be soft. Heaven is like an empty jar of flour. This is in the Gospel of Thomas. It's really lovely, this one. Thomas' Gospel, Jesus said, the kingdom of our loving spiritual Creator is like a woman who was carrying a jar full of flour. While she was walking on a road far from home, the handle of the jar broke and the flour spilled behind her on the road. She did not know it. She had not noticed the problem. When she reached her home, she put the jar down and discovered it was empty. Jesus is saying that the material substances and earthly life force that support our physical journey as we walk along the road of life in the body of the flesh are always slowly running out. When we are born, we start our journey from earth to heaven, and we are at the farthest point from our spiritual heavenly home. But as time goes by, we can draw closer. And just like the woman carrying the jar of flour, we must carry our body of flesh with us until we get home. Then one day our body of flesh will run right out of its life force and lay down upon the earth empty of all life, like the woman's jar was empty of flour when she finally reached her heavenly home. Then if we have used our temporary physical life and its life force to become spiritually alive with love and are ready, we will enter that spiritual heavenly world in a spiritual body full of life and leave behind our body of flesh, now empty of life. That's the empty jar that the woman puts down. You lay down your body, it's empty. Jesus laid down his body of flesh. It was empty of life. He left in his spiritual body full of life. The woman in this teaching of Jesus, who hopefully lived a good life, only discovered she now had another spiritual body to live out of when she left her dead body of flesh at the time of its death, which is now just food for the vultures, as Jesus said in his teaching about 2 women grinding at one millstone. One dies and is food for the vultures, and one is taken to be near to our loving spiritual Creator in the heavenly spiritual world of love. It's a beautiful saying in the Gospel of Thomas, missing in the other Gospels, of course, because they want to destroy all these things. But the jar of flour, earthly food, nourishment, wheat, it only feeds your body. Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word from the mouth of God. Remember? Her flour, her earthly body's energies ran out, and her body dropped dead. It was empty of life. But her spiritual body, she was looking at it, so she must have been alive in spirit. which everyone is, and hopefully she lived a good life and cared for her kids and her husband or whatever. So whatever she did, maybe she was a nurse in the local village or something. But she hopefully went to heaven in her spiritual body because the jar had run out of its life force. The physical body had run out of its flower, its life force. It was empty of life. Saved by what is within you. Thomas Gospel, Jesus said, if you are born into the one within yourself, that one you now have will save you. I'll repeat that. If you are born into the one within yourselves, that one you now have will save you. If you do not have that one within yourself, what you do not have within you will cause you to have no true life. Do you see what he's saying? If you're born into the one within yourselves, that one you now have will save you. If you awaken your spiritual body now, you've got one sitting there. If you're watching this in a chair, you've got a spiritual body with you, and it's going to leave your physical body when it dies. That's the one he's saying you've got to get into. And he explains how to bring it alive and get into it. But you've got to practice being spiritual and then manifest it. Pacifist, non-violent Christian. Full of love for everyone. Don't worship money. Jesus is saying we must be born again into our inner spiritual body and soul, mind of love identity for us to be saved to the heavenly spiritual world. This is the ultimate goal that Jesus gives us to aim for. And without being born into it and bringing it alive through listening to and understanding his teachings, we will have no real, true spiritual life. These teachings of Jesus are powerful reminders that our true spiritual identity is inside us, and we are responsible for our own transformation into spiritual children of our loving Creator as a free will choice. But he has left us the instructions to follow, and he and our loving Creator in the heavenly world can always see us and will do all they can to help us succeed. We can talk to them any time about anything and ask for guidance and help, and it is surprising how coincidental, unexpected and quirky their responses can be to encourage us and let us know we are not alone in this battle. They can always see us. Heaven can see you right now, I assure you. The problem's going to be when you're actually in the presence of heaven in your spiritual body. It's too late to say sorry or to stop killing and murdering children like the warmongers. It's too late for them. God is love. Love is life. So move into becoming at one with love. Right? That's life. Look through the body of your flesh. The nexus to heaven, the connection to heaven is within you. Flesh gives birth only to flesh. Spirit gives birth only to spirit. Marvel not that I tell you, says Jesus. You must be born again into your spiritual body. He says it over and over and over and over and over and over. And he explains how to become spiritual, and that's what his teachings are all about. Love and non-violence, become spiritual. Let go of the physical world. Let go of hating others. Forgive and you'll be forgiven. All those sorts of things. All these instructions. It's the instruction booklet of how to reach heaven. I like reading it a lot. I wish I was better at it, but I'm trying to improve all the time because that's the goal. Only become spiritual before your body of flesh dies and returns to the earth. Your spiritual body goes to the source of your spirit, a spiritual world, a spiritual being of pure love. Is this spiritual body that's been planted in your body of flesh clean, full of love and ready to enter that beautiful world? Or is it covered in murder after murder after murder after murder after evil, like all the present warmongers of the world and all the soldiers in those stinking satanic armies? They cannot enter heaven when they die, and it'll be too late. They're going to suffer all the deaths they caused. It's that simple. But if they don't believe that, then they're going to go on killing. They better believe it. I can only warn them. Drop down your guns and go home and love your family. And love the people that you're currently killing. Because they are your brothers and sisters and your sons and daughters and your mothers and fathers. But you are too stupid to know it. Anyway, ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is dangerous. Okay then, love your way to heaven or hate your way to hell. You know, I advise you to love your way to heaven. I'm not condemning you or judging you. I'm just telling you that you'll judge yourself. Be careful. Watch out.